Well, good evening, everybody. I am John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020. And as we finish out 2020, I am doing a review of my books that I've read on my channel over the past 2 years. My channel called McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA. One of the many channels that got terminated over the past few months by the Google gods, the YouTube rulers, whoever you want to call them, because of, well, I'm not really sure why. They just said terminated due to violation of terms of service. So, not being one to want to get into every fight that comes my way, I'm like, so okay, I'll start another channel. And lo and behold, here we are. We've got, what is it now? 2,730 subscribers, and so that's a quarter of where we were when we lost it at 11,600. Well, I'm glad you're here with me tonight, Tyrone and Corky, Fred, David, and everyone else who's here, all 10 people. Well, tonight I'm going to do my own sort of review, sort of retrospective of this great book by the great writer Jim Marrs called The Rise of the Fourth Reich. And as with all the books that we read, we also have a subtitle. And the subtitle is often as important as the main title, and in this case, it's The Secret Societies That Threaten to Take Over America. Now, this book was published in 2008. It's far from his first book. The first great big hit of a book that he had was this famous book here, Crossfire, about the Kennedy assassination, John Kennedy. It was one of the books relied upon by Oliver Stone in making his movie JFK, and with good reason. Jim Marrs is one of the great experts. He is from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and his work on JFK involved teaching a course on the JFK assassination every year for 30 years straight. So he knows his stuff. And his other books, I've got at least, I've got most of them anyway. I thought I would just go over to Wikipedia for a second and give you a brief bio of Jim Marrs. He was born in 1943, died August 2nd, 2017, at the age of 72. A great loss. He was a news reporter, and as he started studying, the JFK material, he had the advantage of having been a intelligence officer in the United States Army and was able to be a translator in both French and German. So a good background. He has published Crossfire, the plot that killed Kennedy, in 1989, and it received excellent reviews. He's written on UFOs. He's written on other topics. One of his books that I have is Ruled by Secrecy, which claims to trace a hidden history connecting modern secret societies to ancient ones. And here's a list of his. Oh, come on, Wikipedia, give me a list of his books, for goodness sakes. I'm going to go over to the Jim Marrs homepage. Hopefully that's still active. Rule by Secrecy, Alien Agenda, Crossfire, Psi Spies, The Sisterhood of the Rose, Who's Who of the Elite, which is very useful, The War on Freedom, 9/11 and the War on Terror, Inside Job, well, there's also this one here on my shelf, Population Control. Well, I can't name them all, but suffice to say that they're all very much worth reading. As I say, I've read about 5 of them, and they form a wonderful background for the work that we're doing now. This book was published in 2008, and for me, it really was the first time I'd seen a really scholarly approach to all of these conspiracy quote theories, and how did they relate to reality, you know? So he is one of those great writers that not only is he prolific, but he writes his bibliographies, and he does an index. And there's nothing I love more than a great index in the end of a book. So when you get to page 375 and you realize you've got another 50 pages to go, which consists of bibliography and index, everything is noted in terms of the bibliography. So it's a professional job of writing. Well, I have a number of different ideas of what I wanted to present tonight about this book. Let me start with his introduction. Adolf Hitler's Third Reich ended in Berlin on April 30th, 1945. Thunder reverberated from a storm of Russian artillery that was bombarding the ruined capital. The day before, along with incoming shells, came particularly bad news for the Fuhrer, who by this late date in World War II was confined to his underground bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Hitler had learned that 2 days earlier his Axis partner, Italy's fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, had been captured by paramilitary Italian resistance fighters. Mussolini and his mistress, Clara Petacci, were executed, and their bodies were left hanging upside down in a Milan piazza. This news was especially worrisome to Hitler because only hours earlier he had married Eva Braun in a small civil ceremony inside the Führer bunker. Hitler had previously vowed never to be caught alive, and reiterated to his entourage that neither he nor his new bride would be made a spectacle presented by the Jews to divert their hysterical masses. He made obvious preparations for the end of his reign. He handed out poison capsules to his remaining secretaries and had Blondie, his favorite Alsatian dog, poisoned. Dictating a last will, he said, "I and my wife, in order to escape the disgrace of deposition or capitulation, choose death." He ordered that the bodies be burned immediately. But Hitler made it clear that he and his philosophies would not leave the world quietly. He added, "From the sacrifice of our soldiers and from my own unity with them unto death will in any case spring up in the history of Germany the seed of a radiant renaissance of the National Socialist movement, and thus of the realization of a true community of nations." At about 3 p.m. on April 30th, the members of Hitler's entourage heard a single shot from their leader's headquarters. Sometime later, Hitler's valet, SS Sturmbannführer Heinz Linger, and an orderly emerged with a blanket-covered body. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, head of the Nazi Party, and the most powerful man in the Reich after Hitler, followed with the body of a woman. The corpses were carried up to a garden area, placed in a shell crater, and burned with gasoline. However, these remains were never found, reportedly due to the constant shelling. By evening, a Soviet flag was flying atop the Reichstag. It appeared that Hitler and his Third Reich were finished. The next paragraph is captioned, "The Escape of Adolf Hitler." It was well known and publicly reported that Hitler often made use of doubles, men who closely resembled him, for use at certain public presentations. Pauline Kohler, a maid in Hitler's Bergdorf in Berchtesgaden, insisted that she knew of at least 3 men who doubled for Hitler. Did Hitler make use of one final double in the bunker? After all, the few persons who testified that he was dead were ardent Nazis who were eager to please their captor, whether Russian, British, or American, with accounts of the leader's death. Well, it goes on, and the story has been developed in many places since then about Hitler being sighted in these alpine-like village in Argentina or perhaps in Brazil. But there are these villages, there are these places where they have the architecture of a Nuremberg, a architecture that you might see in a German fairy tale book, because there were so many Germans that ended up in South America that entire villages would become German-speaking. Well, did Hitler end up there? I think he probably did. But that's something that is not really important right now. What is more important is the survival not of Hitler himself, but of Nazism, and that is the theme of the book. The Fourth Reich rising out of the ashes of the Third Reich, but never really died. It just went underground. Let's start with Chapter 1, A New Reich Begins. Following the armistice of 1918, which ended World War I, German soldiers returned home to a country economically devastated by the war. The Bavarian city of Munich was hit particularly hard, with jobless ex-soldiers wandering the streets and a number of splinter political parties vying for membership. It was in this setting that Hitler, a 29-year-old veteran, came into contact with members of the Thule Gesellschaft, or Thule Society, ostensibly an innocent reading group dedicated to the study and promotion of older German literature. But the society, composed mostly of wealthy conservatives, ardent nationalists, and anti-Semites, actually delved into radical politics, race mysticism, and the occult under its emblem, a swastika, superimposed over a sword. So, race mysticism, well, that's the theme we've been talking about very much on Macduff Channel when we read the other books that we've been reading, The Guarded Gate, and the War Against the Weak by Edwin Black. The society also served as a front for even more secretive German order, a reincarnation of the old Teutonic Knights, which had branches throughout Germany patterned after Masonic lodges. It's believed that these lodges carried on the agenda of the outlawed Bavarian Illuminati, with its fundamental maxim that the end justifies the means. In other words, members should pretend to be anything or anybody, adopt any philosophy, tell any lie, steal, cheat, even kill, as long as it accomplishes the society's objectives. It was, in fact, wealthy businessmen in Western industrial and banking circles who guaranteed Hitler's success. After Hitler lost a popular election to Hindenburg in 1932, 39 business leaders with familiar names like Krupp, Siemens, Thyssen, and Bosch signed a petition urging the aged Paul Hindenburg to name Hitler Chancellor. In January 1933, through a compromise with German aristocrats, industrialists, and army officers brokered by Baron Kurt Freiherr von Schroeder, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. The deal to name Hitler Chancellor of Germany was cut at von Schroeder's home on January 4, 1933. On hand were prominent industrialists, at least one director of the giant Deutsche Bank, as well as I.G. Farben's Hermann Schmitz and Dr. Georg von Schnitzler, representing Farben's board of directors. According to author Eustace Mullins, also attending this meeting were John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles of the New York law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, which represented the Schroeder Bank. This claim has been disputed by other researchers. At that time, Germany was a free republic with one of the most educated and cultured populations in the world. The country was at peace and enjoying a blossoming of democratic freedom under a coalition government of the Weimar Republic. Oddly, Hitler went against tradition by choosing not to work out of an office in the German Reichstag or Parliament building, and on February 27, 1933, the Reichstag was gutted by fire. In those slower, gentler times, this act was a great shock to the German people, as the destruction of the World Trade Center towers was to Americans in 2001. Hitler blamed the destruction on communist terrorists. Inside the building, the police arrested an incoherent, half-naked, retarded Dutch youth named Martinus van der Lubbe. They said he was carrying a Dutch Communist Party card. After some time in custody, the youth confessed to being the arsonist. However, later investigation found that one person could not have started the mammoth blaze, and that incendiary devices had been carried into the building through a tunnel that led to the offices of Hitler's closest partner, Hermann Göring. So, a little more about the financial backing. He found a huge and powerful industrial base geared for war production already in place and awaiting his command. It had been put in place at the end of World War I, thanks to an influx of Western capital investment. This build-up for European war before and after 1933 was in great part due to Wall Street financial assistance in the 1920s to create the German cartel system and to technical assistance from well-known American firms to build the German Wehrmacht. Noted financial investigator and author Anthony C. Sutton, who added, "The contribution made by American capitalism to German war preparations before 1940 can only be described as phenomenal. For example, in 1934, Germany produced only 300,000 tons of natural petroleum products and synthetic gasoline. In 1944, thanks to the transfer of hydrogenation technology from Standard Oil of New Jersey to I.G. Farben, Germany produced 6,500,000 tons of oil, 85% of which was synthetic. The intertwining of American capitalism with German corporations began following World War I with two programs, the Dawes Plan of 1924 and the Young Plan of 1928. Both plans, engineered in America, virtually guaranteed success for the fledgling Nazi Party. The Dawes Plan, designed to restructure German war reparations, was named for the chairman of the committee, Charles Dawes, and described by historian Carol Quigley as largely a J.P. Morgan production. This plan used American loans to create and consolidate the German steel and chemical giants. Vereinigte Stahlwerke and I.G. Farben, both major supporters of Hitler. It caused anger and frustration among the Germans because it meant foreign control of Germany's finances, a fact constantly pointed out by Hitler in his speeches and appeared open-ended, as no final reparation amount was ever announced. Its successor, the Young Plan, named for J.P. Morgan agent Owen Young, required burdensome monetary payments from Germany. It, too, led to support within Germany for Hitler and his Nazis. Finance between Germany and the Allied nations was controlled by the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland. It was the brainchild of Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, president of the Reichsbank. In 1930, he resigned in protest to the Young Plan, but was reappointed by Hitler in 1933. And the financial genius behind Germany's economic revival. Although his father was an American citizen, Hjalmar was born in Germany during his mother's return there and named after the famous American editor and politician. It was Schacht who provided an ongoing link between Hitler and Germany's industrialists. The BIS was administered by a multinational staff which historian Quigley called the apex of the system of bankers, to secretly exchange information and plan for the coming war. One of the giant corporations created in post-World War I Germany with assistance from American capital was Internationale Gesellschaft Farbenindustrie, AG, better known in its shortened version as I.G. Farben. Created in 1926 by combining 6 existing chemical companies, it was the brainchild of Hermann Schmitz, who became the firm's president. Under his guidance, I.G. Farben became the largest chemical manufacturing enterprise in the world. It was so powerful during the Nazi regime that the firm became known as a state within a state. Farben had subsidiaries, offices, and representatives in 93 countries, including the United States. Paul Manning, a CBS News correspondent in Europe during World War II, explained Schmitz's connections by pointing out that the Farben chief once held as much stock in Standard Oil of New Jersey as did the Rockefellers. By the time the war began in 1939, I.G. Farben had doubled in size, gaining participation and managerial control over 380 other German companies, as well as more than 500 foreign firms. This growth was made possible by bond sales in America, including one for $30 million offered by National City Bank, the forerunner of today's Citibank. One example of the close ties between the United States and Nazi Germany was Walter C. Teagle, chairman of Standard Oil of New Jersey, which was owned by the Rockefeller Chase Bank. Teagle was also a director of American I.G. Chemical Corporation, one of the subsidiaries of I.G. Farben, which changed its name to General Aniline and Film, GAF, in an effort to distance itself from its German owners. Teagle, through Rockefeller banking and oil interests, made his superiors a handsome profit just prior to the war. Teagle remained in partnership with Farben in the matter of tetraethyl lead, an additive used in aviation gasoline, wrote author Charles Higham. German Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring's Air Force couldn't fly without it. Only Standard, DuPont, and General Motors had the right to it. Teagle helped organize the sale of the precious substance to Farben President Schmitz, who in 1938 traveled to London and, quote, borrowed 500 tons from Ethel, the British Standard subsidiary. Next year, Schmitz and his partners returned to London and obtained $15 million worth. The result was that Hitler's air force was rendered capable of bombing London, the city that had provided the supplies. Also, by supplying Japan with tetraethyl, Tegel helped make it possible for the Japanese to wage World War II. Following negative publicity regarding these tetraethyl transactions in 1938, Tegel resigned from the board of GAF to be replaced by future Secretary of Defense James B. Forrestal. Curiously, it was the same Walter Tegel who helped create the National Recovery Administration, one of President Roosevelt's New Deal agencies designed to regulate American business. This was an odd choice if the captains of American industry were as opposed to socialism as they publicly claimed. Another solid conduit for Nazi propaganda and intelligence services was the Hamburg-America shipping line. Max Warburg, a leader of Deutsche Bank, sat on the board of the Hamburg-America steamship line along with Prescott Bush, father and grandfather of two future American presidents. Max Warburg was the brother of Paul Warburg, America's first chairman of the Federal Reserve System, and the man in charge of U.S. finances in World War I. American IG Chemical Corporation was more than just a source of funds. It provided important intelligence to the Nazis throughout the war, as noted by IG Farben director Max Illner, the nephew of Farben's chairman Schmitz. He wrote, "Extensive information which we receive continuously from American IG is indispensable for our observations of American conditions, and is, since the beginning of the war, an important source of information for governmental, economic, and military offices." The banking industry, including foreign financial houses, provided Hitler and his Nazis with the funds to both consolidate and spread their National Socialist doctrine. Throughout World War II, the Bank of Baron von Schroeder acted as financial agents for Germany in both Britain and the United States. Anthony C. Sutton described how John Foster Dulles handled Schroeder Bank loans in the United States. In fact, Dulles, in addition to providing legal services to a joint Rockefeller-Schroeder investment firm, the Schroeder-Rockefeller Company, also sat on the board of directors of GAF from 1927 to 1934. GAF, as it was known during the war, remained a subsidiary of IG Farben. Schroeder, the powerful head of the J.H. Stein and Company banking house of Cologne, had long provided financial support to the Nazis in hopes they would counteract the spread of communism. Hitler had given his word to von Schroeder that National Socialism would engage in no foolish economic experiments. In other words, he would not attack banking practices, except in rhetoric. The closeness between Hitler and the banking industry reached back to the earliest days of the Nazi Party. A year after the meeting at Schroeder's home that launched Hitler into power, Nazi official and ideologist Alfred Rosenberg met with Schroeder Bank of London managing director T.C. Tierks, who also was a director of the Bank of England. Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England, in 1934 informed a select group of City of London financiers that Hitler's regime was a system with a good future. With no opposition, it was decided to provide covert financial help to Hitler, until Norman could persuade the British government to abandon its pro-French policy to one more favorable to Germany. Thus, a curious relationship developed between these powerful banks of two supposedly belligerent nations, which continued throughout the war. Of course, it only appears curious to those who do not understand the economic cooperation among the world's ruling elite. The Bank of International Settlements, soon turned out to be a money funnel for American and British funds to flow into Hitler's coffers and to help Hitler build up his war machine. The BIS was under Nazi control by the start of World War II, with the bank's directors including Schmitz, Schroeder, Dr. Walter Funk, and Emil Pool of the Reichsbank. In 1939, when the Nazis moved into Czechoslovakia, officials of the Czech National Bank removed $48 million in gold reserves to the Bank of England for safekeeping. Under pressure from the Nazis, Bank of England Governor Montague Norman unhesitatingly agreed to move the gold to Switzerland, where it went into Nazi accounts to purchase essential war materials for Germany. Illustrating further interconnecting business associations of this time was was IT&T. German chairman Gerhard Westrich, a close associate of John Foster Dulles, who was a partner to Dr. Heinrich Albert, the head of Ford Motor Company in Germany, until 1945. Two ITT directors were German banker Schroeder and Walter Schellenberg, head of counterintelligence for the Nazi Gestapo, the Nazi Geheime Staatspolizei, or State Secret Police. America's IT&T sold Germany communication and war material, including as many as 50,000 artillery fuses per month, more than 3 years after Pearl Harbor. So it goes on and on with Ford and Tegel and GE and into the Rockefellers, the Chase Bank. All of it is tied together with Allen Dulles and Sullivan and Cromwell, John Foster Dulles, all of these people working together to create Nazism. Well, one might excuse them on the idea of anti-communism in that certainly people in Germany have a constant awareness of the threat of Russia from a long time ago, and with Russia now under the control of communists, the industrialists of Germany feel vulnerable. The bankers of Germany, Switzerland, all of these lands feel vulnerable. So their idea is to create this monster that will attack Russia and defeat the Soviets. The people who financed that didn't really care a bit about the lives of the people on either side. They just wanted to keep their banking and industrial wealth to themselves and keep getting more and more wealthy, as that seems to be their idea of, what life is all about. So to take that crazy idea and finance the creation of this horrible, monstrous, murderous, genocidal state based on racism, based on this Anglo-Saxon, Nordic, Teutonic superiority theory, it looks insane to me right now. But on the other hand, as this Nazism has survived in the form of our cartelized economy, of our intertwined relationship with dirty money, I mean really, really dirty money. And we know that is flown into our financial system, and the stock market everywhere has become open for speculative investments. The absence of Glass-Steagall is a wonderful way for them to continue with the money laundering and putting the dirty money into our economy, diluting the value of the money that we earn in favor of the money that they simply create. Well, I have read enough now to have burned up the first 40 minutes of the hour tonight. But it is Jim Marrs that really tied all of that together. The the idea of the Rockefellers having had an investment in the Hamburg America line or the Schroeder Bank or anything, that doesn't really faze anybody until it really sinks in that this is not a minor investment. This is the merger of Standard Oil with IG Farben. And while we could say, well, that was, they didn't mean to turn into Nazis and attack France and Britain and, turn to the West and ultimately the United States. When Hitler got into power, he made the decision that that was necessary for his safety, because if he were to expend all his energy taking down the Soviet Union, then he could be attacked from behind by France and England and anybody else when he was weak. So I think, it's all about the geopolitics of Germany. That doesn't really have to do with the ideology of Nazism, but just if you want to maintain your sovereignty against powerful countries like England and France, if you're going to turn around and devastate Poland and all of Eastern Europe, devastate Russia, kill tens of millions of people, there's going to be people in the world that don't like that, and I think Hitler probably was wise to go after France first. He certainly was well enough financed. There's a great chapter here on Nazi mind control. Guns, Drugs, and Eugenics is chapter 12. Maybe I'll read a little bit of this one. While Nazi science was brought to America after World War II, so were attendant Nazi restrictions on scientific liberty. Many of the standards of scientific freedom and exchange of knowledge were suspended by all the belligerents, noted John Cornwell, author of Hitler's Scientists. Since 1940, America's scientists have become faceless members of teams working under the auspices of the military-industrial complex or the corporate world. Addressing the Nazi-connected men in control of America's scientific establishment after the war, Cornwell explained, the most dramatic alteration was in the West. The Office of Scientific Research and Development under the government science chief Vannevar Bush, and I know I said that wrong, Vannevar I think it is, Bush, commissioned more than 2,000 research programs in the course of World War II. The project involved industrial research and development units employing tens of thousands of scientists and technicians in companies such as DuPont and General Electric, as well as major university laboratories like MIT and Caltech. A proposal for a barrier between government and military funding and civilian control of the choice and direction of basic research would prove, however, a vain hope. Such tight inner control over scientific advances was reminiscent of the late war Nazi SS control over technology in the Third Reich. Well, I really wish that I could spend about 10 hours going through this book. I'm going to turn now to the epilogue, which I think is probably the most important part of it, because this is him in summation of his book in 2008. That's only 12 years ago. So here's the bottom line. America today is a National Socialist's dream come true. Individuals are computerized, databased, logged, and categorized. Video cameras, motion sensors, metal detectors, and spy satellites monitor our movements, while think tanks and foundations study our every habit. We are constantly bombarded with official pronouncements and advertising. Television is everywhere, in bars, waiting rooms, airports, and usually constantly on in our very living rooms. In our fast-paced society, no one has time to think, much less read deeply. Business, especially corporate business, is king. Giant corporations, governed by faceless directors, answering to shadowy owners, control everything from water to wingnuts. Even the time-honored profession of soldiering has been usurped by private corporate armies like Blackwater, in 2007 already being accused of becoming America's version of the Nazi brown shirts. Meanwhile, the American taxpayer is footing the bill, even though, as convincingly shown in Aaron Russo's 2006 documentary, America, Freedom to Fascism, there is no law requiring Americans to pay an income tax. Of course, the IRS, through its myriad rules and regulations, can drag into court and even jail those who fail to fulfill, quote, voluntary compliance, unquote. Fascism's principles are wafting in the air today, surreptitiously masquerading as something else, challenging everything we stand for. The cliché that people and nations learn from history is not only overused, but also overestimated. Often we fail to learn from history or draw the wrong conclusions. Sadly, historical amnesia is the norm, stated author Dr. Lawrence W. Britt in an article for Free Inquiry, a long-standing publication of the Council for Secular Humanism, which promotes secular humanist principles. Following a careful study of the regimes of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Franco's Spain, Salazar's Portugal, Papadopoulos' Greece, Pinochet's Chile, and Suharto's Indonesia, Britt concluded that these fascist governments had observable similarities. Analysis of these 7 regimes reveals 14 common threads that link them in recognizable patterns of national behavior and abuse of power, he noted. These basic characteristics are more prevalent and intense in some regimes than others, but they all share at least some level of similarity. And Brett's 14 characteristics of a fascist regime, many sounding ominously close to what is happening today in the United States, include, and then I'll just list these bullet points: powerful and continuing expressions of nationalism, disdain for the importance of human rights, identification of enemies and scapegoats as a unifying cause, the supremacy of the military and avid militarism, rampant sexism, a controlled mass media, obsession with national security, religion and ruling elite tied together, power of corporations protected, power of labor suppressed or eliminated, disdain and suppression of intellectuals and the arts, obsession with crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption. And I'm going to let you guess what the last one is. Okay, I haven't got my drum roll yet. You know, what, one of our subscribers sent me a drum roll sample with on a message from on my email. So thank you for that. I haven't hooked it up to my jingle buttons yet, though. So without a drum roll, who can guess what is number 14 of the 14 characteristics of the fascist state? Number 14 is fraudulent elections. I kid you not. right here on page 369, fraudulent elections. Elections in the form of plebiscites or public opinion polls were usually bogus. When actual elections with candidates were held, they would, as a rule, be perverted by the power elite to get the desired result. Common methods included maintaining control of the election machinery. This guy is good, isn't he? I mean, he wrote this 12 years ago. Yep, flapjacks, you got it. Crooked elections. Intimidating and disenfranchising opposition voters, destroying or disallowing legal votes, and as a last resort, turning to a judiciary beholden to the power elite. Oh no. Americans are well aware of the controversies concerning the presidential elections of 2000 and 2004. George W. Bush's first term was decided by the Supreme Court, not the voters, and it was just as bad in 2004. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., writing in Rolling Stone magazine, stated, Republicans prevented more than 350,000 voters in Ohio from casting ballots or having their votes counted, enough to have put John Kerry in the White House. Controversy over both elections continues today, and in 2008, charges of vote fraud were already being voiced in the state primary elections, primarily over, I want another drum roll now, primarily over, let's say it all together, computer voting machines. Many Americans noticed the similarities between George W. Bush's unprovoked attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq and Hitler's unprovoked attacks on Poland, the Low Countries, and France. In both cases, the pretext for invasion proved false, and reservists were used rather than the option to resort to a military draft. In early 2008, a study by the nonpartisan Center for Public Integrity documented 935 false statements by the Bush administration in the months leading up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Nearly 5 years after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, an exhaustive examination of the record shows that the statements were part of an orchestrated campaign that effectively galvanized public opinion and, in the process, led the nation to war under decidedly false pretenses. The biggest stumbling block to the plans of the globalists has always been the United States, with its tradition of individual freedom, its constitution that guarantees that freedom, and the fact that so many Americans own firearms to protect their freedoms. But true freedom is a transient quality. National politicians no longer refer to the Republic because modern America has ceased to be one. It is now an empire, a new Reich. Obviously, there are dissimilarities between Hitler's Third Reich and the new American Reich. After all, the United States today is a very different time and culture, but it has been demonstrated how the same philosophies and methodologies employed by the same families, corporations, and organizations that at one time supported Hitler's Third Reich have now found roots in modern America. It has been necessary for these fascist globalists to break up the United States. I stop there because it's just too uncanny. Okay? To break up the United States into divisions of race, sex, age, generation, and culture. This has been accomplished through a degrading of popular culture, downgrading the educational process, permitting a steady flow of illegal immigrants, and the fragmentation of the population over issues such as abortion, immigration, non-heterosexual relationships, and foreign policy. Control over a diminished national economy and corporate downsizing has brought undue stress on workers, resulting in the gradual destruction of the nuclear family. None of this construction of the new American empire has come about suddenly. The global National Socialists, Nazis, are in it for the long haul. The owners of the multinational corporations, with their membership in secret societies, know their goals will not be achieved overnight, although since 9/11 they seem to have redoubled their efforts, speeding up the timetable. While businessmen deal with yearly quarters and the average worker lives for his weekly paycheck, these people look ahead 50 years, or 100, if that's what it takes. They realize that their program of a global fascist socialism is the only means of maintaining their power and control, the only way, in their view, to maintain the purity of their race and class. They laugh at the concepts of true individual freedom and multiculturalism, for they have no faith in the innate goodness of humankind or its ability for self-government. They have no real faith in God and use religious ideals and concepts merely as another tool for social control. The struggle against such steadfast will to power and its attendant control will not be easy. Sacrifices and change will have to be made in all areas of society. Lifestyles will have to be altered, but it can be done, hopefully, before the United States falls into depression, anarchy, and then a police state. New energy sources and technologies are lurking in the wings. Technological breakthroughs await only the change of attitude on the part of conventional politics, commerce, and finance. We may do well to recall the words of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had to deal with a previous New World Order. In a 1940 address, he stated, "The history of recent years proves that the shootings and the chains and the concentration camps are not simply the transient tools, but the very altars of modern dictatorships. They may talk of a new order in the world, but what they have in mind is only a revival of the oldest and the worst tyranny. In that sense, there is no liberty, no religion, no hope. The proposed new order is the very opposite of a United States of Europe or a United States of Asia. It is not the government based upon the consent of the governed. It is not a union of ordinary, self-respecting men and women to protect themselves and their freedom and their dignity from oppression. It is an unholy alliance of power and self to dominate and to enslave the human race." Unquote. That's Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1940. I'm going to let him have the last word from Jim Marrs's The Rise of the Fourth Reich, the secret societies that threatened to take over America. And, Jim Marrs is a giant, and so many of us are indebted to him for his incredible life's work. So that's Jim Marrs's The Rise of the Fourth Reich in a little less than an hour. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'll see you in the morning with Minefields at 11, and then tomorrow night at 8 for Thursday Trio, Professor Hamamoto and George Webb.